everybody. And it is the live experience, as even Bill Gates knows. Yeah, the inspiration for this presentation was that song, which some of you might remember from 1991. It's a band called CNC Music Factory. And the concepts for the slides are the things that really don't make sense to me in EFL 6 years in. I haven't been doing this all my life, but I switched over from the video games industry, mobile phones, into EFL about 6 years ago, 7 years ago, and I've attended probably 20, 25 conferences, seminars, symposia. I've spoken at most of them. Have really seen at what everyone has to say about pretty much every subject, and there's still some things that I don't get. The first one being why we don't talk more about motivation. I mean, it is mentioned, it does get a little bit of airplay, but really it doesn't get the kind of focus that it should, because without motivation there is no learning. Obviously, a lot of learners, certainly kids and some employees have the obligation to attend classes in English. But again, it risks being a passive experience and an ineffective one, and therefore a monumental waste of time if there is not true motivation to actually become proficient in the language and use it in your life, as Jason was saying. If you look at this visual, these are migrants, of which there are about 3,000 right now in Calais on the coast of France, trying to get into the UK. They are trying to get into the UK in any way, storming the tunnel, hopping on trucks and so on. They are clearly motivated. And when some of them are interviewed on television, they have quite surprisingly good levels of English. Clearly, this has been a preoccupation of theirs for some time. They realize that without English, they have no chance of a better life, and the game plan is to get out of the conflict areas where they live, get to safer areas, more prosperous areas, where they do have a chance, and a lot of the times that does involve English. So there's a real motivation there, and you can see it. I'm not sure how to advance the slides. Can you go to the next one? Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, just go back one. So secondly is, one thing I don't understand is why English is too often just positioned as a language. You'll often have in a school or in a university, okay, we have a Department of Modern Languages, you've got Spanish, you've got German, you've got Portuguese, whatever, you've got English. English is not an academic subject, it's not just a modern language. It's not a subject matter that you have to pass to then pass another standardized test like a TOEIC or a TOEFL to then qualify for some university or whatever. And it shouldn't be just something that your company requires you to do. English is so much more, and it's unique among languages. It's really the way people participate in the modern world today. It's a code. It's a universal code with which you can unlock new friendships from all over the world. It is really for anyone, and particularly for people in any kind of struggling part of the world or developing economy, it's the passport to global opportunity. Even in our own countries, a teen or a young adult who doesn't have English has very limited options. It's the common wavelength for artists, for musicians, for filmmakers, for policymakers, for scientists, for entrepreneurs. And it is really freedom for the future, freedom of option for the future. So I think we need to do a better job in how we position English, not just as a language, not just as a subject, just not one more hour slot that fits into the school schedule, but we are enablers of opportunity with English. And I think we need to do more to make that clear, to really position English in a different way. If we go to the next slide. So connected to that is really the craziness of still being in this situation where we're sort of defining, well, this is British English and that's American English, and in this school we teach British English, and in that university you had better get more familiar with American English. That may have been the case when the British Empire was there and where Americans didn't travel. We live in a world economy. We live in a connected global reality, and so this whole artificial divide is crazy in 2015, and we can't. Going back to my previous slide, we can't position successfully English as a global language of opportunity if we then create this sort of balkanization of English through this distinction. So we can go back to the third slide. One thing we know for sure about our learners in that 99.9% of cases, when they leave our classrooms, they won't go and live the rest of their life in Birmingham, or they won't go and live the rest of their life in Boston. They'll probably move around. They might move to different countries. They might move to non-English speaking countries, but where English is used in different walks of life. And that English will be world English. They will be in contact with people from all over the world who learned English as a second language. Some maybe a little bit more with the British orientation, others with a more American orientation. But for them to be proficient in English and be comfortable in English, they will have to be at least familiar and able to negotiate meaning across those boundaries, across the different ways of spelling words, across different expressions and idiomatic expressions. They have to be comfortable with a boss who's maybe Indian, who learned English in India and speaks with a strong Indian accent, but integrates some Australian slang because he did a tour of duty there in his previous corporation, and he's explaining things to a bunch of Americans, and so it's going to be a mishmash of all kinds of things, and that is world English, and I think it's a great thing. It enriches the language, and so we have to stop this sort of apartheid between one type of English and another. If we go to the fourth slide, this subject here is something that actually predates my involvement with EFL. My very first language, even though I was born in New York City, was Italian because my parents were recent immigrants, and we spoke Italian in the house. I then started going to school, and in fourth grade, by that time we had moved to New Jersey. We got this big, thick grammar book. It was brick red. I remember it was very thick, and it was all about grammar and arcane grammar. Every kind of sort of rare form that you might imagine, and I hated it. I mean, I was very good in English. I was one of the best kids in my class in English when it came to spelling or composition or speaking or comprehension. But as soon as the grammar part of a test came up, and it was not introduced like use the right form, but it was like explain this clause, I was useless. And when I got involved in EFL, I was surprised to find out that a lot of teachers feel the same way. I mean, they hate grammar. They don't feel confident in explaining grammar the way the textbooks explain it. And so you can imagine what their effectiveness is in then transmitting this to learners who are just as resistant to this form of kind of hacking the language to death. So, I think, thankfully, modern methodology, recognizes this, and we're moving more towards inductive grammar based on content and context, and focus on grammaticalized lexis and not the opposite. But it is alarming that so many teachers and so many national curricula still have this, joyless and enthusiasm killing on grammar, particularly the way it's taught often. Can we go to the fifth one? Because that also kind of follows along the lines of trying not to make language abstract. And I know that this will maybe create some enemies. I know a lot of people, including people on this webinar, have spent many hours in their Masters of TESOL courses, looking and studying and learning these charts and learning how to teach with the charts. But frankly, I can't see it. I have never met a learner who retained any of this, who didn't go on to sort of become a linguist or a PhD on that focus. I'd say the overwhelming majority of learners of English, this is just one step too far. And and I think it complexifies things. I think, again, our job is to help people negotiate meaning and communicate intent. And it's not to say that pronunciation is not important. On the contrary, pronunciation is hugely important. And most of us learn how to pronounce in various languages without ever having seen a chart like this. So it is important, but I honestly think that this is an abstraction that gets in the way of effective learning and efficient learning. If we could go to the next one, please.
Great. Yeah, Paul, we're at
oh, really?
10
Okay.
Minutes.
Okay. Well, yes. Well, the last one. You can all see it. Okay. Yeah. The very last one is number 10 on my list. Sorry. I took up too much time, but it is. If we look at the various levels of proficiency across the world, and EF actually makes an annual study of this. It's surprising to me why these differences aren't analyzed more scientifically. I don't think, if you look at the first group, I don't think that English teachers in Denmark and the Netherlands and Sweden are 10 times better than those in Panama and Algeria and Sri Lanka. But the results are vastly different, and we as professionals, we have to start asking ourselves, well, why is that? I mean, what are the other environmental factors? What are the contexts? How is English? Are they exposed to English a lot more in their daily life? Through which channels? Why? Are the national curricula for learning different in public schools? And until we tackle these differences, we can't, as a group, as a global group, which we are on this call, actually have a voice in persuading governments to actually look at this and say, well, there is a better way. There are ways that seem to work. Why don't we adopt these universally in the interest of English proficiency, which is an objective of most of these countries? So that's it for me. I will be much tighter on my next 10-minute whirlwind. But